sea bueno. Y So the Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. And we want to welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on securing the future of American agriculture. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement, and I'd like to say it's my honor to chair this first hearing of the Subcommittee on Immigration and Citizenship in the 116th Congress. I'm pleased that we're focusing on an issue of such great national importance, the growing labor challenges that are damaging the American agricultural sector. We've held many hearings on this issue over the past 2 decades. We have examined the need to provide permanent residence to the undocumented agricultural workforce, the need to reform the H-2A temporary visa program, and even potential alternative solutions to meet our agricultural labor needs. We've always agreed that a solution is necessary, but agreement on that basic principle has not been enough. My hope is that today's hearing will be the last on this issue and that we will finally find a bipartisan, balanced solution to the agricultural labor challenges that have vexed us for far too long. Finding a solution is critical. A robust domestic food supply that is stable and safe is a matter of national security. Heavy reliance on food imports makes us vulnerable to food contamination and epidemic. It can also lead to other serious problems, including an increased national debt and wildly fluctuating market prices. From 2004 to 2014, food imports rose by nearly 60% and now account for nearly 1/5 of the U.S. food supply. And although the increase in imported foods can be attributed in part to changing consumer demands, systematic labor challenges are also a contributor. As we know from past hearings, mechanized crops like corn, wheat, and soy are not the real problem. The challenge is with seasonal, labor-intensive crops, largely fruits and vegetables, as well as dairy, livestock, and specialty crops such as mushrooms, some of which are produced year-round. These require an experienced and often flexible workforce. While farmers do their best to plan harvests, unexpected changes in humidity or temperature can change things quickly, giving growers just weeks or days to pick valuable crops. If harvest workers cannot be quickly located, significant crop loss can occur, and the cost of which ripples through our economy down to the consumer. The number of self-employed and family farms has declined significantly over the past several decades, and fewer U.S. workers are turning to agricultural work as their chosen pursuit. Because of this, the vast majority of today's hired farm laborers are foreign-born. Unfortunately, our immigration laws have not been updated to adequately fill the void and to reflect the needs of our 21st century economy. For example, our immigration laws provide only 5,000 green cards per year to people without bachelor's degree. That's 5,000 green cards, not just for those working in agriculture, but also for those working in landscaping, forestry, hospitality, as nannies, and many others where immigrants fill workforce gaps. And so when people say people ought to get in line, it's worth pointing out there is no line to get into. Although undocumented workers continue to comprise about half of the on-the-farm workforce, that workforce is aging, and replacement workers are dwindling due to increases in border and interior enforcement and an improving Mexican economy. And as a result, more and more employers are shifting to the H-2A temporary ag worker program. In fiscal year 2018, nearly 200,000 H-2A visas were issued, more than triple the number issued in 2012. But the H-2A program has been sharply criticized by both farmers and labor groups. Farmers claim the program is too burdensome and expensive, and labor groups say that it fails to protect U.S. wages and prevent the abuse and exploitation of foreign workers. Currently, the H-2A program needs our attention, but even with much-needed reforms, the program alone cannot meet our labor needs. Current farm workers remain a critical component of the total agricultural labor force. They've been in the U.S. for an average of 18 years and have developed knowledge and skills that cannot be easily replaced without incurring significant costs. These farm workers came here and filled critical needs. Many of our constituents are still in business because of them. No acceptable solution can fail to deal with this reality. We have to find the courage to do what is right, to provide a seat at America's table for those who have long grown the food we serve on it. The right solution is a balanced approach that preserves the current workforce, provides a reasonable process for employers to bring in future workers, one that is also flexible for workers and protects them from abusive situations. On January 17th, I introduced the Agricultural Worker Program Act of 2019. This bill would provide the ability to earn a blue card and eventually permanent residence to long-term agricultural workers here in the United States. It is my hope that the introduction of this bill, along with today's hearing, are the first steps towards finally finding a bipartisan and lasting solution to the labor challenges that threaten the future of American agriculture. I'm committing right now, and I have been committed to working with my colleagues across the aisle to make this hope a reality, and today I am full of hope. With that, I would now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Buck, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This hearing is an important opportunity to examine America's agricultural labor needs and the role of foreign workers, an issue very important to me and the people of Colorado. We must work toward enacting fundamental agricultural guest worker reform that will benefit American agriculture, the American consumer, and hungry people all over the world. After all, America is the world's breadbasket, and its corn bushel, and its salad bowl, and its potato patch, and its dairy farm. This hearing is not about how we handle certain crops. Instead, it is about year-round labor-intensive agricultural products or products that require additional help at certain times of year, such as harvest. Colorado provides a great example of the problem we are examining today. Leprino Foods is the largest manufacturer of mozzarella cheese in the United States and a leading producer of whey protein. They have 2 production facilities in the 4th Congressional District of Colorado. When I visited Leprino, I heard stories about how they had the capacity and market to increase their production. However, Leprino can't ramp up their business to meet market demand because the local dairies can't produce more milk. I also met with those local dairy farmers. They confirm that recruiting employees continues to be the largest challenge to their growing businesses in supplying more dairy products for this country. This is the same story I hear as I visit farm after farm across my district. Labor is the lifeblood of the agricultural industry. Without the ability to find and retain a reliable workforce, our agricultural industry will continue to struggle to meet the market's needs. When it comes to labor needs, agricultural labor is in a class by itself. There is little debate over whether there are enough Americans willing to take on the job of a migrant farm worker. In fact, over the past several decades, our government has only encouraged Americans to abandon such labor, leaving foreign workers to fulfill our seasonal agricultural labor needs. The Labor Department believes that workers who do have legal status appear to be leaving farm jobs because of age or opportunities for more stable and higher paying employment outside of agriculture, and are being replaced almost exclusively by unauthorized foreign-born workers. What legal labor force options do growers have? Since 1986, the H-2A program has provided visas for temporary agricultural workers. However, over 2 decades ago, the American agricultural industry told this committee that the program was characterized by extensive, complex regulations that limit employers' ability to use the program, and by costly litigation challenging its use when admissions of alien workers are sought. They allege that the Department of Labor was implacably opposed to the program. For growers, the H-2A program was intended to ensure the availability of a sufficient labor for key needs like harvesting, but for a program created to dynamically offer labor supply to those farmers and ranchers most in demand, timeliness has never been a strong suit. 2 decades later, little has changed. An apple grower told us that were it not for the H-2A guest worker program, broken, costly, and perilously litigation-prone as it is, we would be unable to farm at all. One of the most frequently cited reasons our region's farmers go out of business is that they simply cannot continue under the burdens of the current H-2A program. The H-2A program itself is designed to fail. It is cumbersome and full of red tape. Growers have to pay wages far above the local prevailing wage, putting them at a competitive disadvantage against growers who use illegal labor. Employers must also follow onerous regulations like the 50% rule, which requires them to hire any domestic workers who show up even after the employer has recruited for U.S. workers and welcomed his or her H-2A workers from overseas. In short, under H-2A, growers can't get workers when they need them. Bureaucrats decide if employers have a full workforce, not the weather or crop conditions. Moreover, employers constantly face frivolous litigation by those who don't think the H-2A program should even exist. What growers need is a fair and functional guest worker program, one that gives them access to the workers they need when they need them at a fair wage with reasonable mandates. Growers need a partner agency in the federal government that treats them as allies, not as adversaries. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Other members are invited to submit their opening statements for the record. And before introducing our witnesses, I would like to welcome the son of Mr. Stubbe of Florida to our panel. It's wonderful to see the new generation sitting with his dad to listen to this. And I also would like to note that we have our colleague, Mr. Jimmy Panetta, sitting here listening, and he is joined by two other members I know who are on their way who have put immense effort into this effort, and that's Congressman T.J. Cox and Congressman Josh Harder, who've been essential in terms of their support of our efforts. I'd like to introduce today our witnesses. Arturo Rodriguez has served as the president of the United Farm Workers from 1993 to 2018, succeeding the organization's esteemed founder, Cesar Chavez. As president of the UFW, Mr. Rodriguez worked with lawmakers and agricultural organizations in pursuit of legislation to protect the rights of workers and to reform our immigration laws. He has previously testified before the House and the Senate, including the subcommittee, to discuss the important contributions of immigrant farm workers to the American agricultural industry, and we warmly welcome him back to the subcommittee. Tom Nassif began his tenure as president and CEO of Western Growers in 2002. Prior to this, he served under the Reagan administration in many capacities, including White House Deputy and Acting Chief of Protocol, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asian Affairs, as well as Ambassador to Morocco. Mr. Nassif has testified before the Senate on labor issues in the agricultural industry, and we welcome him today. Arely Arteaga was born and raised in the United States and grew up on a dairy farm in Idaho. Ms. Arteaga comes from a family of farm workers. Her mother has worked on farms, harvesting an assortment of crops, and her father has more than 20 years of experience in dairy, and her uncle works seasonally in the H-2A temporary visa program. She graduated from the University of Idaho in 2017 with a Bachelor of Science in Economics and Political Science and is an alumna of the College Assistant Migrant Program. Ms. Arteaga now works with the United Farm Workers, and we are happy to warmly welcome you. And finally, but not least, Mr. Bill Brim and his partner Ed Walker purchased Lewis Taylor Farms in Tifton, Georgia in 1985 and transformed the company into a diversified transplant and vegetable farm operation. Lewis Taylor Farms was one of several farms in Georgia to organize a farm labor association in 1988 during the farm labor shortage, and is one of the first farms in Georgia to be recognized as a Good Agricultural Practices, or GAP, certified farm. Mr. Brim was recognized as Georgia's Sunbelt Farmer of the Year in 2009 and has previously testified before the House and the Senate on agricultural issues. At this time, I would welcome all of our distinguished witnesses to stand and be sworn in. If you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Thank you very much. The witnesses have all said yes, and we would like to thank you for being here today. Let each of you understand that your written statements will be entered into the record into their entirety, and so we would ask that you summarize your testimony in about 5 minutes. And to help you stay within that time, there is a timing light. When the light switches from green to yellow, that means you only have 1 minute left, and so we'd ask you to start summarizing when that happens. When it turns red, your time has expired. So we will begin with you, Mr. Rodriguez, and then down the line, if you could proceed. I'm not sure. Yes, there you go.
Got it. Thank you very much, Chairwoman Lofgren, Ranking Member Buck, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm joined today by Marta Montiel, Eugenia Gonzalez, Vicente Reyes, Adelaida Mendoza, Rogelio Lona, Sidronio Jimenez, Francisco Naranjo, Leobardo Padilla, and Miguel Vasquez. Collectively, these women and men have more than 200 years of experience working in agriculture, and they have planted, cared for, harvested, and produced vegetables, mushrooms, citrus, tomatoes, nuts, wine grapes, and milk. We feed you. We feed people throughout the country without regard to region of the country, race, gender, age, ability, or whether they are Republicans or Democrats. And so it's past time to change our immigration laws. The women and men who are professional farm workers have earned the right to apply for legal status. And the agricultural employers that farm workers partner with to feed America deserve stability and more certainty given all the challenges we face in agriculture. We are ready to work with members of both political parties to come up with policy that honors those who feed us and respects a nation of laws. There is an ugly race-based history of federal law excluding farm workers from the same basic labor protections as other workers, including the Fair Labor Standards Act and worker protection regulations and pesticide registrations. Present-day biases against farm workers and rural communities include the fact that chemicals like chlorpyrifos, which have been shown to lower IQ in children, are banned everywhere else but continue to be permitted in agriculture. According to the federal government, at least half of our agricultural workforce does not have legal status. The agricultural visa program, the H-2A program, has tripled in size from 82,000 positions certified in 2008 to over 240,000 positions certified in 2018. But the fees have stayed the same since the 1980s. The difficulty of agricultural work and the uneven enforcement of laws have meant all kinds of farm workers have suffered. Miguel Vasquez, a worker on H-2A visa, died while picking tomatoes in 95-degree heat in Georgia, just one of dozens of farm workers that have died in the last 10 years because they did not have proper access to water, shade, or breaks. Dairy workers in Washington State and Idaho have died gruesome deaths drowning in manure ponds. In 2017, the U.S. Department of Labor found a group of farm workers in the H-2A program housed in converted school buses roasting in the hot Arizona sun. Last week, Maria Gonzalez from Washington State and Librada Paz from New York State shared in a congressional briefing their fight against sexual harassment and assault. And yet, overwhelmingly, when asked what farm workers most enjoy about their work, you will hear over and over again a pride in feeding the rest of the country and many parts of the world. The goal of any new immigration proposal should be improvements in farm worker wages and working conditions. These need to be an end to the status quo of poverty and abuse. Farm workers cannot continue to be second-class workers. Unless this changes, there will always be challenges attracting a stable workforce. The employers who have led in fair treatment should not be at a competitive disadvantage by employers breaking the law. A new immigration program should be based on a very few set of principles: fairness, equality of treatment. Temporary workers should have the same rights and protections, including access to the courts, as the U.S. workers. Women and men should receive equal treatment. No discrimination, economic freedom and opportunity, family unity, eligible to earn lawful permanent residency. United Farm Workers and Grower Associations have come together after sometimes tough negotiations on immigration policy that makes sense for the United States. That's notable because we have opposed each other in most other legislative fights. But I am confident we will come to agreement again on immigration policy that will ensure America's food supply, improve the lives of farm workers, and ensure agriculture employers can continue to be successful. In fact, just a few weeks ago, pesticide manufacturers, agriculture employers, farm workers, and major forces within our food supply worked with Congress on a bipartisan basis to set aside differences to come together and achieve sensible solutions that are good for workers, consumers, and American agriculture when Congress unanimously reauthorized the Pesticide Registration Improvement Registration Act. You can do it again. We can do it again. Let's work together, farm workers and agriculture employers, Republicans and Democrats, each region of the country, to make sure we are able to continue to feed America. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Nassif, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Chairman Lofgren, Ranking Member Buck, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and thank you for choosing to shine a light on the labor needs of agriculture and your tireless work to provide much-needed solutions. My name is Tom Nassif, and I'm President and CEO of Western Growers. Our members are small, medium, and large agribusinesses that produce, pack, and ship roughly half of the annual fruit, vegetables, and 3/4 of the tree nuts in the United States, grown both conventionally and organically. Although our membership extends throughout the entire United States and beyond, our members are headquartered in California, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. There are certain facts that I don't believe anyone should question. The first fact is that working in the fields is obviously physically demanding labor. There's insufficiency as far as the availability of a legal labor force. Those taking these jobs are not displacing those here legally, since regardless of pay and other benefits, they just don't want to do this kind of work, and understandably. The majority of those falsely documented or here illegally, however you want to phrase it, pay their state and federal income taxes, as well as contribute to Social Security without any hope of ever collecting. They're law-abiding and proud to grow food for this nation and other nations alike. And if there's serious disagreement over any of these facts, I ask you to commission a bipartisan study to either validate or debunk the allegations I've just made. We've come very close to passing immigration reform in agriculture several times. Senate Bill 744 in 2013, and most recently in 2018. We have been unsuccessful because we've been divided in our goals and in our needs. Only by pledging allegiance to the collective needs of agriculture can we dissuade others from seizing upon these internal divisions and proffering legislation that does not meet the needs of the whole. What we ask is based upon the economic future needs of our industry and is in no part political. There are also strong humanitarian interests at play as well. Some of our pressing needs would include a legal status for our long-standing, reliable, existing workforce and their families without the need for a touchback. An H-2A remake that is not an administrative nightmare, that does not price our producers out of business. The ability to fill all of our jobs without the burden of a cap. Since these workers are not taking work away from those legally eligible to work, there's no displacement, and there's no economic model that would justify hiring more workers than are needed. And lastly, establish E-Verify for agriculture only after the law is implemented and operable so that we have adequate enforcement. Now, to succeed in resolving decades-long effort to correct the mistakes of the past and the present, we need a bipartisan bill that would have a reasonable chance of being signed by the President. It will take statesmen and women of the highest order to find a pathway to compromise. It will take the same reasonableness on the production side, knowing we must be willing to accept less than an optimal resolution and try to understand the political dynamics which make difficult changes to our immigration system in any form. We are prepared to work with all due diligence needed to reach these objectives. There's no path to immigration reform unless the solution is bipartisan. Approaching this difficult task with a heart at peace and not a heart at war. And finally, I'd also like to say a special word about our colleagues in the dairy industry. As you all know, the dairy industry, like the fresh produce industry, has been hit particularly hard with labor issues. Due to definitions in the existing H-2A visa program, farmers are not able to participate, not dairy farmers. Specifically, since dairy farming is considered a year-round activity, dairies are unable to qualify under the seasonality provisions of the H-2A program. As labor markets have tightened, dairies are increasingly being adversely impacted. For many dairies across the country, small, medium, and large, labor problems are endemic, and many are on the verge of collapse. I appreciate you allowing me the testimony, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we will hear from Ms. Arriaga.
Thank you. Chairwoman Lofgren, Ranking Member Buck, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Areli Arteaga, and I am proud to have contributed to be a part of a family whose labor feeds this nation. I was born and raised in Idaho. Most of my childhood and teenage years were spent on a dairy farm where my father worked. My mother works in potatoes, of course being from Idaho, but also onions, corn, and carrots. My first experience working in the fields was at the age of 9. I worked every summer from the age of 15 until I had the opportunity to do an internship here in Washington, D.C., this being through the Department of Education through the College Assistant Migrant Program. My father has worked in the dairy industry for 25 years. Dairy work is difficult, dangerous, and skilled. My father's work is focused on taking care of the health and welfare of the cow. My dad typically works about 12-hour days, 6 days a week, although when they're short-staffed, I've seen him work 2 weeks straight. As my father explained to me as a child, cows don't know days off. They don't know holidays. They don't know birthdays. I've seen my father wake up at 1, 2, and 3 in the morning from calls from his job. His duties include keeping the paths clear for the cattle, helping deliver baby calves, and keeping the cattle alive. He is responsible for diagnosing and treating ill cows. He is able to identify 800 cows through memorizing them in each cow pen. This is extremely important because if that cow is being treated with medication, they need to be milked separately so that the milk we drink is not contaminated. My father is proudest when he has a sick cow and the cow reacts in a positive way. He knows he helped that animal survive. While my father works year-round, like most people in the dairy industry, my mother works seasonally. She typically works in the onions for about 5 months, setting, repairing, and later removing the irrigation system, as well as weeding the onions. She does other crops too. Potato season is about 6 weeks, in which they cut the seeds and later harvest. Corn season is also about 6 weeks. My mother and her coworkers have developed strong allergies affecting their health and welfare while corn detasseling. At other times of the year, she also works in the alfalfa fields, placing larva trays into bee houses. In a year, there are times that she will work 3 of 5 of these crops. No matter rain, wind, hail, they are out there producing our food for us. What I learned in the field is it's not an easy task. It takes skill. One of the memories that has resonated with me still to this day was one day when we were working in the onion fields. We were given the task to remove a weed that wraps itself around the crop. We were not allowed to use a hoe because the onion was too young, and we would pull the onion out of the ground. While I struggled to work on my knees for long hours, my mother would loop back around and teach me skills with the knife to help me catch up with the rest of the crew. I was also surprised when comparing paychecks with my college friends that they were being paid time and a half for an 8-hour day when they were working in retail, but I wasn't paid for overtime hours in the fields. That, to be honest, is more difficult. Don't we deserve overtime pay like other workers? My uncle has worked with an H-2A visa for the last several years in alfalfa. He comes to Idaho from Mexico for 5 months each year. For many years, as difficult as the work was, my father's work at the dairy brought us stability. But after years of working at the farm where I grew up, my father felt he wasn't being treated fairly, and my family was stuck. He knew it was time to leave. I was in college, but my 2 younger siblings were at the family home. My father knew if he left that job, he was giving up this home. But he did what he thought was best, and we were found without a home. I do wonder what it would be like to be an H-2A visa holder where the employer has complete control of their job, housing, and visa. My mom and my dad are proud of me, and I feel proud having been from Idaho and graduating with a BS in political science and economics. I am proud of my parents and of my family because they came to this country with just the clothes on their backs. They are now contributing to their communities, and one of them being by their skilled job. I asked my mother what she is most proud of, and she shared being able to give us an education to me and my siblings. My family are all immigrants, and the people we work alongside are all immigrants too. Wherever I go, I see the people eating the food that we have harvested and drinking the milk my father has helped produce. It seems that the U.S. immigration doesn't make sense. I'd like to see my parents treated with the same kind of respect that they taught me to show for others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Arteaga, and I am sure that your parents are very proud of you. We'd like to now invite Mr. Brim to offer his testimony. Is it not working? Why don't you switch places with Ms. Arteaga?
I'll have to say, Madam Chair, this is a good Georgia boy. I bet he could just yell if he needed to.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, Chairwoman Lofgren, Ranking Member Buck, and Collins, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to be here today and discuss the labor crisis facing agriculture. My name is Bill Brim, and I am co-owner of Lewis Taylor Farms, Incorporated in Tifton, Georgia. We are a diversified specialty crop operation farming nearly 6,500 acres. We have been using the H-2A agricultural visa program for our harvest and packing operations to supply our dwindling domestic workforce for more than 22 years. We are blessed to have an abundance of natural resources enabling us to grow in this country. But what we do not have plenty of is labor. And without a sufficient labor force, our other resources are of little use. Sufficient labor forces out of our resources are of little use, and lack of workers is causing serious harm in labor-intensive agriculture of our domestic food supply. This crisis is a direct result of the misguided and outdated federal policies that Congress has failed to address. So just like any problem that is ignored, the problem does not magically get better, it gets worse. Each year, more and more farmers quit farming and move their labor-intense operations outside of the United States to be closer to the labor force. As a result, each year, more and more Americans eating imported fruits and vegetables, further harming domestic producers. In the 1970s, the U.S. was a net exporter of fruits and vegetables. Today, we import 3 times more fruits and vegetables than we export. Congress established the H-2A Temporary Agricultural Visa Program nearly 35 years ago in an effort to help farmers who met their labor needs when there was a shortage of willing and able U.S. workers to do the work. But the H-2A program has, from the beginning, been plagued with rigid rules, excessive complexities, bureaucracy, delays, and runaway cost. It is no longer wonder that it is generally viewed as a last resort for most farmers now. In recent years, as the labor supply has continued to tighten, the U.S. use of the H-2A program has increased, but that is not a testament to the H-2A program's success. Rather, it demonstrates just how dire the labor situation has become in the United States of America. Farmers are so desperate for labor that they are willing to participate in the program, and that drastically increases their costs, their labor liabilities, and their uncertainties. The H-2A program must be reformed and modernized so that we can have a guest worker program responsive to the needs of the 21st century agriculture. First, I am sure that we can all agree that legal U.S. workers must have the opportunity to take any farm jobs before it would be filled by a guest worker. But we should also all be able to agree that there are not anywhere near enough U.S. workers to fill the farm jobs we have available each year. We see this reality every day at our farm. For example, last year we had nearly 900 H-2A workers positions available. We had 10 U.S. workers who applied and were hired. 8 of them left relatively quickly, and just two stayed with us to complete the season. This experience aligns with the Department of Labor's data that shows, on an average, just 3 out of every 1,000 positions certified for H-2A are filled by a U.S. worker. This labor problem must be addressed by action in 2 areas. The current H-2A program must be reformed to provide a flexible program responsible to the needs of farmers and the workers. A current farm worker who lacks worker authorization must be provided some type of legal status. In my written testimony, I mentioned several issues that need to be addressed in the modernized guest worker program. Let me take a moment to highlight just a few of them. A reform program must include all sectors of agriculture. The current H-2A program is overly restrictive and allowing participants only by growers who need is 10 months or less. In many areas of the country, the grower and harvest seasons last longer than 10 months, and for some agricultural operations, such as dairy, their need is year-round. Other operations included on-farm value-added processing and packing, and those activities should also be included. A reform program must also address the broken wage methodology of the H-2A program. This year, several states experienced H-2A wages increases of 23%. Nowhere in the U.S. did wages in any occupation increase 23% last year, except in the H-2A program. And remember, the current program also requires a farmer to pay all of the other costs of the workers, including housing and transportation. This is unsustainable. I will close with a positive note about the H-2A program. The current program has no cap on the number of visas available. The element has worked very well over the years and enabled the program to adapt to market demands. The certification by the Department of Labor that there is a shortage of U.S. workers serves as a check to ensure guest workers are not admitted to the U.S. unless there is need. A reformed guest worker program for agriculture must not have a visa cap. I hope that Congress will finally fix this problem. The labor shortage in agriculture is a national security issue. A country that cannot feed itself cannot defend itself. Our food is going to continue to be harvested by foreign workers. The only question is whether that food will be harvested and grown by U.S. growers or in a foreign country. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brim. We will have a questioning by the members of the subcommittee, but before we do, we have been joined by the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Collins, and I would like to invite him to make his opening statement, should he wish to do so.
Madam Chair, thank you so much for that. Before we begin, I must note that, again, I'm glad we're having this hearing. I want to continue to emphasize not only this part of legal immigration, but as I said earlier today, it's hard for me to admit, but Jay Johnson, former secretary, and I actually agree there is a crisis on our border that we do need to talk about all parts of our immigration system. And the chairlady knows this, and we've had many conversations about this. So I look forward to continuing that because we cannot not take action and simply talk about it. This is something we need to do. But we're here today to consider another important issue, the nexus of immigration and agriculture. My congressional district in Northeast Georgia is home to a vast agricultural industry and hardworking farmers, ranchers, growers, and processors who contribute to America's economy and our communities every day. I'm part of that. My family and my wife's family are in the poultry industry. We have 4 chicken houses. We know what this is like, and we know what our part of the state is. In fact, there's over 10,000 farm operators grow everything from peaches to cattle, from chickens to strawberries. And I'm pleased to have one of Georgia's finest here today, Bill Brim. Bill is what we say is Georgia grown, and we're happy about that, and it's good to have you here today. I know firsthand also what the farmers face when they try to assemble an adequate workforce. Farmers like Drew Eccles of J. Moore Farms need help harvesting crops. Georgia peaches are fickle, so timing is everything, but the H-2A system offers almost no flexibility. This means extra hands may arrive too early or too late to get the fruit off the tree and into that homemade pie. Workers who arrive before crops have ripened aren't allowed to find work on the other farms while they wait. At the same time, family operations like J. Moore invest a lot of time and money applying for H-2A workers, knowing these applications aren't always processed in time to get workers onto American farms. Farmers need a more flexible and less bureaucratic system as the agricultural industry, including meat processors, strive to put food on America's table. Right now, to secure an H-2A employee, growers must start with the Labor Department certification process. By the law, the department must certify that there are not sufficient able, willing, and qualified U.S. workers to fill these jobs. Employing an H-2A worker will not adversely affect the wage or working conditions of similarly employed U.S. workers. While I believe these requirements were well-intentioned, we should revisit their implementation since they have an expensive and time-consuming side effects, even though we all know that growers simply cannot find U.S. workers. Most Americans would prefer to work less labor-intensive jobs, preferably with air conditioning, even in the rural areas with long, rich agricultural traditions. Farmers often raise their children to pursue other lines of work. And I will say this is one, as I mentioned Drew just a moment ago, Madam Chair. Drew is granddaddy is the starter of this farm, and from his parents' home, Jimmy and Valbreth started that. And Drew told the story to me a few weeks ago that when you talk about these requirements, he would have people who would come who were required to go look for work. They would come to him and they'd say, I would like a job. Well, Drew would say, I'll hire you right now, and it was very good wage. He'd say, we'll start you today, we'll go at it. And they said, no, I don't want to work out in the strawberries. I don't want to pick peaches. I want to go work in the shed. Well, the family works in the shed, and they said, well, we don't have a job down there. And literally, they would turn around and walk off. So sometimes I think this requirement is something we need to, again, look at. It's also cost prohibitive, the H-2A program, because many times growers must pay over thousands of dollars in fees per worker to the government and to recruiters. In many states, agricultural employers are required to pay artificially higher wages. The adverse effect wage rate is over 11 per hour at its lowest and over 15 at its highest, depending on the state. On top of these costs, growers must provide transportation and housing to H-2A workers once they arrive in the U.S. So the H-2A employers who are doing their best to follow the law are routinely undercut by growers who pay lower wages because they use laborers who are not authorized to work. This combined with the lower cost of fruits, vegetables, and other agricultural products grown in the country and shipped in the U.S. are driving American farmers out of business in their current position, and by extension, the current H-2A program is simply unsustainable. Congress has the ability and responsibility to enact a reasonable agricultural guest worker program so growers can pay legal workers a fair wage and also make a fair living for themselves. So what does this look like? That's why we're having this hearing today. How are we going to go about that? I commend the subcommittee chair for taking this on. I commend my ranking member, Ken Buck, for being a part of this, and the other members of this committee. We've got to tackle these issues. This is something that is inherently dependent on our security and our going forward. We will not always agree on the answers, but we will need to at least ask the questions. Unfortunately, both parties have refused to ask some of those questions. It's now time we do so, whether it's the crisis on our southern border or the crisis on our farms. It's time we give the help that we need. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and thank you. Before turning to the Vice Chair of the subcommittee for her questions, I would like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record the following statements and letters in support of the Agricultural Worker Program Act of 2019, a letter from the Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, a letter from the Farm Worker Support Committee, a letter from the Center for Migrant Rights, a statement of farm worker justice, a statement of student action with farm workers, a letter from United Fresh Produce Association, and a letter from over 140 immigration and agricultural organizations. Without objection, that is added to the record, and Ms. Jayapal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your tremendous work on this issue and so many others within the immigration sphere, and for having this hearing. We're here today to talk about some of the most important workers in our country. That is farm workers, workers who do essential back-breaking work, growing the food we eat and taking care of the livestock. These workers are absolutely critical to making our nation function, and we'd be lost without them. And yet the vast majority, some estimates are as high as 75%, are undocumented and vulnerable to deportation and abuse. I come from a state, Washington State, that relies on our agricultural industry and on the workers who power that industry. And over the years, we have actually been able to find bipartisan support for reforming comprehensively the immigration system, and this as a piece of that, and I hope we can get to that place again. And so I'm proud to be here today to look at what we can do to better support our farm workers, not just for the sake of the workers in our country and their families, but also for everyone in our country who depends on these workers to put high quality, decently priced food on the table. So I want to start with you, Ms. Arteaga. Thank you so much for being here and for your articulate and powerful voice on this issue. Can you tell me briefly, because I only have 5 minutes, as a former farm worker and child of a dairy and farm worker, what a regular day looks like?
Thank you for the question. Working in the field, so you have to wake up at extremely early hours of the day, depending on if you have children. I know a lot of mothers out there who wake up at 4:30 in the morning to make sure that their children's lunch is packed and to get out of the house. And I just briefly want to describe my day working in the cornfields. So I would wake up, and depending on the size of the corn and depending on the humidity, I would wear a rain suit. If it was humid, if it was wet, it would be muddy. When the corn is young, essentially what you do is bend over and you detassel each corn. And mind you, you're doing this on both sides, so you have 2 rows next to you. During midday, you're sweating crazy because of the rain suit that was protecting you in the morning. By the time that you're getting later on, further along in the harvest season, I'm 5'3". The corn reaches to be a lot taller than 5'3". I would have to bend the corn so that I could detassel them. So it's extremely back-breaking work. For example, the strawberries, being on your knees 9, 10, 11, 12-hour days, it's extremely hard. When parents get home from the fields and they want to run and hug their children, mind you, they've been exposed to pesticides all day long. Luckily, my mother knew this about working this potential hazard, so she would take her clothes off before hugging us, but not everybody knows that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And there are some people that refer to agricultural workers as unskilled workers. In your mind, is this an unskilled job?
So I don't know if many of you know how to lay bee larvae in an alfalfa field in a bee house. Or if maybe you have, I know that I have a degree, and you don't want me in charge of your milk. You don't. I have no idea how to place an IV on a cow. My dad, with 25 years of experience, he's doing this work. He's getting calls at 2, 3 in the morning. to give birth to baby calves, whether they're breached. He knows exactly what to do. Thank you.
How about you, Mr. Brim? Do you find a difference between skilled workers who have been coming back year after year? How would you describe this job? Do you see it as an unskilled worker
Well,
job?
I think the basis of what you're talking about is what we call unskilled workers, or pickers, versus our tractor drivers or other people that drive forklifts or something.
What about your
like
farm
that.
workers? What about the people who are directly picking the fruits and working as Ms. Arteaga?
Well, there's certainly a training period for anything you do, no matter what you do. And
Thank you.
certainly, once we train those people, then we love to have them repeat visit us, because we don't have to do a retraining program with them.
Absolutely. One of the things I kept hearing from my growers is this is a skilled job, and we should really be calling these workers essential workers, not unskilled workers. I'm concerned by reports that eliminating immigrant labor could cut U.S. economic output by $32 billion, resulting in over 200,000 fewer jobs nationwide. And the dairy lobby has said that immigration raids that target dairy workers could result in the price of milk for a gallon of milk rising to $8. So, Mr. Brim, could you tell me what the consequences of losing the immigrant workforce would be?
It would be devastating for all of us in the farming industry. We have to have labor. They love coming up and working for us. We started the H-2A program in 1997, and we have some of the same people coming back every year. Probably 80% of them coming back every year to work for us.
Thank you. And Mr. Brim, in the past you've said if you don't have immigration, you'll quit eating. Mr. Rodriguez, I know my time has expired, and so I just wanted to thank you. I had some questions for you I didn't get to, but I wanted to thank you for your decades of service and for raising issues that are so critical and advocating for our farm workers across the country. Thank you.
The gentlelady's
Thank you
time
very
has
much.
expired. I will turn now to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Buck, for his 5 minutes.
Questions?
Questions?
Yes. So I had the pleasure of working on my aunt and uncle's ranch for 10 years, ranch farm operation. And it occurred, I witnessed, I suppose, when an employee received a green card, so went from an H-2A program and received a green card, they no longer stayed in the country and worked on the ranch. What they would typically do is to go into town and get a job with a landscaper or some other employer. I'll start with you, Mr. Brim, but I'd like to hear from 3 of the witnesses about what would be the impact in terms of a permanent legal status or a green card status for on the agricultural industry?
It would be devastating for the farmers because of the illegal status of the people. They come into our country and they start working, and then they get legalized the green card, they're going to work somewhere else. They're not going to work on the farm. In 1986, I believe, we had 150 workers that signed up for the Bracero program, and all of them left within 6 months.
And my understanding is right now, and I talked the same thing in my district, we have a lot of cantaloupe, watermelon farmers, and they love the program, although they have problems, as everybody does, but they love the program because so many of the workers come back to their farms every year. And they're almost as if they're family. They leave in October, they come back in April, and they appreciate the fact that the program works in that sense. But is it your view that changing the program would be detrimental to the farmers?
Well, it's according to what we can do as far as doing the program. I think there's lots of fixes that we can make for the program, even the blue card provision.
And I'm talking about specifically the change to a more permanent status.
Permanent status. Yeah, I think you've got to do the fix to both. If you don't do the fix to both, then you're going to ruin the farmers.
And again, I think this is actually something we're trying to figure out in a bipartisan way. This is not by any means a partisan issue. I think we really want to make sure that the workers and the farmers have a program that works for everybody.
That's right.
But I want to make sure that is there a point if someone comes through an H-2A program for 10 years, then they would qualify for a green card. Is there something that we can do in the middle of where we are right now, where it's either H-2A or green card? It's either someone that has an incentive to work on the farms or someone that does not have an incentive. And I guess I'll go to Mr. Nassif with this question.
Thank you for the question. We have never advocated for a legal status other than the H-2A visa for the workers who have been primarily engaged as guest workers.
Okay.
So we don't see that as something we've ever supported in the past, and certainly if that happened, we'd lose a lot of workers. So you'd have a lot of employers that would have a difficult time with that. But we have advocated for our existing workers to work for a couple of years before they are eligible to work for another 3 to 5 years in agriculture after that, understanding that they're going to go on and, as you say, and work in other industries where the work is not as arduous, but that's understandable. Our workforce is aging. The average is about 40 years old. Farm workers are not raising their kids to be farm workers anymore.
Right.
So
I need to go to Mr. Rodriguez with the rest of this question, if I can, for a short answer. Yes, sir.
I would just say that in regards to farm workers getting legal status, I mean, there's 8 farm workers that are here from different states, different crops, different industries, and they all have legal status. And for them, agriculture is a profession, and they're very skilled at it, and they've stayed in the agricultural industry. I think overall, the reality is that we have to figure out a way within the ag industries that how are we going to elevate the status of the workforce? How are we going to provide them with enough wages, with benefits, with other types of things that will keep them in agriculture and keep anybody who's coming in as an H-2A worker, keep them in agriculture as well, regardless of whether they have legal status or not.
Okay, and thank you. And for the last few moments that I have, I just wanted to thank my friend, Congressman Panetta, for being here. Oftentimes, people are here when they get introduced. Congressman Panetta is here because he is interested in this subject and taking notes on it, and I really appreciate the fact that you participated today. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Mr. Correa for his questions at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lofgren and our ranking member for holding this most important hearing. I want to thank the witnesses here today. I hear a lot of commonality when it comes to where we need to go. I hope we don't get caught up in the weeds and get somewhere where it actually works for everybody. Y también les voy a dar las gracias y la bienvenida a todos los trabajadores que están aquí hoy. Esta es su casa. Mi familia, todos han sido agricultores. And let me say that I want to concur with all of you in wanting to keep ags as an important industry in our country. It's one of the top industries in California. It's one of the top industries in this nation. And I want to make sure we continue to be the breadbasket to the world. I want to make sure that when there's any crisis around the world, whether political or otherwise, people can rely on America to feed the rest of the world. And that means we have to continue to focus on ag and take care of ag. When I was growing up, I spent many summers in Central California picking oranges and plums. And Ms. Arteaga, you're absolutely right. You got to get up really early in the morning because you got to quit by the time that sun gets right up there and it's too hot to work. So you're out there at 5 in the morning, you quit by 12 or 1. A lot of hard work, but a lot of honest work. I have a cousin who came from Mexico, went to Idaho, sin documentos, undocumented. He ended up getting a green card. And he stayed as a worker on those potato farms because that was his calling. That's where he was happy. And today, as I close my eyes and I think about all the years of work we've done in California to protect the farm workers, to make sure they live a decent life, and Mr. Tom Nassif, the conversations that we've had over the years on immigration reform, and just listening to your discussion here today, I'm asking myself, what's the best way to continue to have a strong workforce in America? Our workforce, Mr. Tom Nassif, is aging very quickly. In Orange County, our unemployment rate is 3%, less than 3% right now. A lot of the workers we have that take care of our lawns, cook our food, take care of our families are undocumented. And I can say, Mr. Brim, a lot of the times when they get a green card, those workers don't shift from one or the other because a lot of the workers that I've just described are undocumented. California is still a big area of factory manufacturing, a lot of undocumented. And the question I ask myself is, why can't we have just one pathway to citizenship for all workers? Because everybody that comes to America works hard to enrich this country, to make us strong, deserves to be an American someday. And I think if you give folks that green card and you give them the hope of being an American, they're going to work really hard because they're already proud of their work product. And I hope all of us today and in the very near future can talk about how to get there. An immigration reform that strengthens America by bringing us the hard workers that we need and keeping them here legally. I'm going to have a quick question because I'm running out of time. Brits, for all of you, why not a pathway to citizenship for all workers? Historically, people came from Europe. Everybody had a pathway to citizenship. I don't know why this last group of workers can't have that same opportunity. Open it up for all of you.
Well, as you know, we have advocated for a pathway for the existing workforce that are undocumented, because they have shown an allegiance to the industry. They have worked hard, and as I say, paid their taxes, and they've got strong ties to the community. They have children there, and I think we have to give them some sort of legal status, and I think we have to protect their families. Additionally, we obviously have a way for everyone to become a U.S. citizen through the normal process. The question is, do we make exceptions in specific instances? And sometimes you have to say yes, and sometimes you have to say no.
Yeah, when do you think we have to make exceptions?
Well, I think there should be exceptions for our existing workers who've obeyed the law, been here for a long time, worked very hard in the industry. I think they deserve a pathway.
I think everybody that works hard and obeys the laws and pays the taxes deserves a pathway to citizenship. I'm running out of time. Love to talk to you offline some more later on. Thank you very much, and I welcome all of you again.
Gentleman yields back, and the gentleman from North Dakota, who's sitting in now as ranking member, is recognized for his questions.
Madam Chair, and I appreciate that debate. I think that debate gets broader than the actual workforce challenge that we sometimes face. North Dakota is #1 in the entire nation in producing barley, beans, pinto beans, canola, flax, honey, wheat, durum. We're #2 in sunflowers, and we're #3 in sugar beets. And if there's one issue I get more calls on my office on than anything else, it's this program. And it goes to what we were saying about a program of last resort. Just in the last several days, and I want to go back to what was said earlier about temporary work status and getting up in the morning. North Dakota doesn't have large-scale production agriculture. We actually have a ban on on corporate farming in our state. And so when we're talking about getting up at 4 a.m. and calving or going out, it's usually when we're bringing workforce in, whether they're coming from Georgia, Honduras, Mexico, or South Africa, the owner of the farm's with them at 4 a.m. and they're continuing and doing that producing. But so I think we also have to get past this concept of seasonal work, because if anybody understands seasons, it's people in North Dakota. But the reality is agriculture is a 24/7, 365 job. Whether you're planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, fixing a shed in the winter, or running a cattle operation, whether it's dairy or a feedlot. And the restrictions that we see coming in on seasonal workers, I have a very good friend who runs a cattle operation in Leeds, North Dakota. She has had the same job advertised nationally for 7 years and cannot get it filled. So when we talk about opportunities from the American workforce, and she continues to apply for H-2A visas and then gets told she's running out of her season, or she has to skip a season. Well, if you're in a feedlot and your season ends March 30th, your second season begins April 1st. I mean, that's the reality of how this works. I had another friend who has a house for his temporary workforce in a community hooked up to water, but in the winter he winterizes it because he only uses it for seasonal work. USDA wouldn't grant him permission to have his visa because they couldn't see running water coming out of the tap. So there are real structural inhibitions that we do to this. But we also have 30,000 open jobs in our community and in our economy, and we've been blessed with an oil boom in Western North Dakota, and throughout the last 12 years, we have managed to weather these processes better than anybody else. But what we want is a workforce. We want people to come in, and I would prefer, I think we need to get creative with these things. We should be allowed to do temporary workforce, allow these programs to go, allow people to keep the workers they want. If they keep them for 10 years, I mean, you age out of this type of labor just based on the fact that it's incredibly difficult labor. And allow family farmers to sponsor people. I mean, we should be having all of these conversations, and we should continue to work for it. So I guess I'll start with Mr. Nassif. I mean, if you could pick 2 things to streamline the H-2A process, like the burdens that really truly hit it, what would they be?
Well, we've talked about the complexity of getting workers to the fields on time when the harvest is needed and not having sufficient laborers when the harvest is really there. So an expedited process, it makes it less complicated, less expensive, less legalistic, would of course would be a big fix. But I think we have to really look at this issue of a cap very closely, because what's the reason for a cap? Is you want to make sure that you don't take American jobs, that you limit it to just what you need and not hire more people. So we know that people who are legally don't want the jobs, so we're not displacing anybody. So what's the purpose of the cap? Nobody hires more workers than they need, because that's not a smart economic model in any business. So those 2 items, I think, were both very important.
Is H-2A capped?
No.
Okay. And then I guess my question, and for me, it's, I mean, obviously regional and territorial to some degree. How do we work for these situations where the workforce is, I mean, very different in California than it is in North Dakota. We need ag workers in North Dakota, have needed them for 30 years. We'll take them from anyone who's willing to work and be a part of our communities. We'd love to have them. But has there been any discussion about how we do this in a regional manner?
Well, obviously, if it's uncapped, then all regions are equal. If you have a capped program, then you have to allocate between regions. How do you do that? California has about 400,000 to 500,000. Are you going to give them all to California? Or are you going to try and spread them out to other areas that are desperately in need also?
Well, and I think anybody who likes honey would like some of them to come to North Dakota as well. With that, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for her questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for holding this hearing. This is something that I've followed for many years as someone who grew up, and Ms. Arteaga, at your age, my first real job where I actually got paid, didn't get to keep the money because it went to the family kitty, was picking cotton. So I know about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready so that the wagons came by to get out there and start working. So it's not an easy job, and I want to welcome all the other members of Mr. Rodriguez's group that are here. Y también yo les quiero dar el bienvenido a su capitario y les quiero decir que para mí este tema es uno muy importante porque yo también nací trabajando en los campos de algodón en el sur de Texas. Así es que yo sé el trabajo que hacen, así es que muchísimas gracias. So thank you again for all your work, and I wanted to start with you, Ms. Alquera, because I think people don't really quite understand that even though you and I have probably a couple of generations difference in age, that even though the difficulties I saw when I worked the fields and had to pick cotton, and it wasn't for fun, it was to keep my family together, as I'm sure it was your reason, that so many things just haven't changed. You know, the need for rest breaks, the need for medical care, the education, one of the things I hated the most was having to remember to put either a piece of old newspaper or a page from the Sears Roebuck in my pocket, so that when it was time to go to the bathroom in the woods, I'd have something, right, to clean myself with. I mean, some of the things still exist in some of these fields, so if we could do, in addition to a pathway for citizenship or some of the things that we're discussing here today, what's the single most important thing that this Congress could do to help farm workers today?
Just one thing, because there's pesticides, there's shade protection for workers. I know that it's established in California, but there's other states like Washington, I know firsthand, that they also get, temperatures over 100 degrees, Idaho as well. So I think it's hard to say just one.
But if you had to prioritize it, I mean, if you get one wish today.
Aside from a pathway to legalization?
Yeah, right, because that's already kind of on our list today.
Well, that's a good question. That is, I don't know how to answer that in one single term, but I think
Well, I don't have
pesticides
a
is up there.
lifeline for you, but, well, think about it. I'll ask Mr. Rodriguez the same question. Mr. Rodriguez, how about you, sir? I have also followed the farm worker movements and started. I had the pleasure of meeting Cesar, and he was always one of my heroes. If there was one thing that we could change in Congress today, aside from the citizenship of the visa status that we're talking about and the bill itself.
I think farm workers, like any other worker here in this country, I mean, they have to be able to sustain their family, themselves and their family. So the economic situation of farm work has to be elevated. I mean, we can't expect people to go into the most difficult work that there is in our nation and in the conditions that they're confronted with and not pay them a decent wage like anybody else. And so if we don't deal with that particular issue, then it's going to be very difficult well, not only to attract people, but to keep them there.
Well, I agree with you, and I was very encouraged that Mr. Nassif said in his written testimony and repeated that he was looking for legal status, not just for the worker, but for the entire family, and that the entire family should be kept together, and that there was nothing more important than the dignity of the worker and their family. So I was really pleased to see someone representing the growers to say that. And Mr. Nappis, I just wanted to ask you a question, just to be clear. When you say you believe in legal status, do you mean full permanent citizen, or are you just referring to the legal status of the visa itself?
No, for us, we're very interested in making sure that we have a legal status. But we believe that status should be determined by those people who have political interests in what that should be. For us, this is an economic issue and a humanitarian issue.
Right.
We work very hard for some sort of work permit for those existing workers, something that gives them the freedom to stay in this country with their families and continue to work in agriculture.
Well, again, I'm very encouraged by that, because often when I've heard this debate before, it's always the focus on the worker and the work and the work. And, the worker's not a machine. They have to be seen as people. They have to be seen as, the breadwinners that they are, the mothers, the fathers, the children, especially the children. And I've always, I sometimes wonder how people got away with putting me to work at 9. But I had to do it. It was part of helping my family. So the violation of the OSHA requirements and the child labor laws, all the things together, I mean, to me, we need to go beyond just worrying about we have work to do. Well, it's work to do, but we got to think about the people involved and treat them with that dignity and respect that you're talking about. I see my time is up, and Ms. Arteaga, I'll visit with you afterwards. Maybe you'll tell me what your wish is.
Overtime for farm workers, that's my final answer.
What's your final answer? Overtime? That would have been great.
Overtime
too,
would
wouldn't it?
benefit my mom specifically, who is still working. Actually today, shout out to my mom.
Yeah.
But she's out there in the fields in Idaho today working. So
Yeah, they were
overtime.
always 12 or 14-hour days, weren't they?
Yep. Gentlelady's time has
Thank you.
expired. We'd like to recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for hosting this important hearing. Thank you to the witnesses for their testimony, and also thank you to my colleague, Representative Buck, the ranking member from Colorado. In my home state of Colorado, as Representative Buck mentioned, agriculture is an integral part of our economy, generates more than $40 billion in economic activity annually, supports more than 170,000 jobs. with cattle and calves making up over 50% of all the receipts. My district, I represent northern Colorado, the 2nd Congressional District, privileged to be home to some amazing farms and organic dairy producers, many of which I understand are also represented by the Western growers. These great farms and by extension, great products are certainly something we should be proud of, but fundamentally, they are only as good as their backbone, which is their employees and the farm workers who work in their fields. Over the past few months, I've had the privilege of serving in Congress. I've certainly received troubling calls from farmers and others concerned about the shortage in agricultural workers and deficiencies in the H-2A program. Many of my constituents are asking for a congressional solution to what is causing immense strain on the viability of farmers everywhere. And so I appreciate the chairwoman's efforts and also the ranking member's comments with respect to trying to find a way to come up with meaningful solutions to ensure a viable and stable future for U.S. agriculture. Not just the farmers and the dairy producers in my district, but for the wonderful agriculture workers who are the backbone to our nation's food security. Mr. Nassif, I want to start with you. As you rightly pointed out in your testimony, I believe your written testimony, my beautiful home state of Colorado has an incredible farming heritage, including large dairy operations. As has been adduced during the hearing today, and you have pointed out, dairy producers have been unable to leverage the labor resources of the H-2A program. Dairy production is a year-long process, as my colleague from North Dakota also referenced, and the Immigration and Nationality Act authorizes the lawful admission of the United States of temporary non-immigrant workers to perform agriculture labor or services of a temporary seasonal nature. Thus, by plain definition, dairy workers cannot receive H-2A visas. So I am curious if you could speak to the need for a more flexible and efficient agriculture worker visa program, one that would encompass all farmers, dairy alike, and how we can best retain skilled labor within the United States.
Well, I think certainly for the dairy workers, the simple answer is to change the definition from seasonal temporary to year-round workers. I don't think there's anybody in agriculture that isn't supportive of that. While it might make, obviously, there's going to be a request for more visas, H-2A visas, so that's very competitive, but the dairy industry is so fundamental to this country that it doesn't make sense to say because you're year-round, you shouldn't have access to foreign workers on a visa basis.
Thank you, Mr. Nassif. And it's
Sir, could I respond to that as well?
Sure, Mr. Brim.
In southeastern United States, we're really hard working. We work long hours. I'm the first one at the farm every day. These are workers that we have. They're great people. We appreciate them coming to work for us. But in the dairy people in the state of Georgia are just suffering really bad because of the targets that they're getting from ICE or whoever else that comes in, wage an hour or whatever. And our group here in the southeastern United States, produce people are year-round farms. So we need to extend this, even if you make the person temporary and the job full-time. We have to have full-time. We can't farm for 10 months down in our area.
And I would say, thank you, Mr. Brim. It's eminently frustrating that it's such a simple fix, right? That Congress, obviously the Department of Labor, to the extent it comports with the statute.
I'll be glad to hit you right if you want me to.
To change this regulatorily, although I will also say that while I agree, and I think that eliminating that restriction makes a whole lot of sense, I think is part and parcel to the larger conversation that we've been having and that multiple members have referenced with respect to also finding a pathway to legal status for the individuals who are doing this work, to the extent, because again, I think agriculture and the industry, as I see it, is saying that it is not seasonal in nature, and that this is work that could continue and should continue year-round and would apply to broader industries than perhaps the industries that it applies to today. And I would think that providing a legal path, a path to legal status for those individuals who are working so incredibly hard in our country to feed our families, I would just think is something that this Congress could, I would hope, rally around. With that, I see my time has expired, and so I will yield back to the chairwoman.
Gentleman yields back. I would recognize now the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Mocosel Powell, for her questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman. Thank you so much for the panel, for being here today. I think it's a very important issue. Muchísimas gracias a todos los trabajadores que están aquí escuchando. Quiero que sepan que nosotros los vemos, los respetamos y vamos a hacer todo lo posible para encontrar una solución y proteger su trabajo, porque tenemos que valorar lo que ustedes hacen. Sorry for that. Is that allowed in committee? To just go
just
off
did
in
it.
a different
Yeah.
language?
It's fine.
Leave it to the Ecuadorian immigrant to do that. I represent a district where a large portion of the sector represents an agricultural sector, and that industry is really fighting for its survival. I have met with agricultural owners who are in dire need for labor. They tell me that the H-2 visa program has been very difficult because we have a shortage of housing, and that you must provide housing. At the same time, our migrant workers have come to me in desperation because they are not treated fairly. They are not paid fair wages. Some of the wages that they receive are used as a bargaining chip when they need, their basic necessities, and then they're selling them these necessities 2-3 times higher prices in the areas where they live. And I think that it's important that we're having this conversation today, because I know that many farm owners want to find a solution. You want to take care of your workers. And at the same time, we have our farm workers who are feeding us. We produce the highest rate of green beans in the country throughout the entire year. So if you're eating green beans, that's coming from my district, from South Florida. We are eating the food that would not be available to us if it weren't for their hard work every day. So I think that it is imperative for Congress to find a permanent solution, not temporary work, but a permanent legal solution for the thousands of farm workers that are living in this country. So to that, I would like to ask first Mr. Rodriguez. I know that the H-2A program has been criticized by some as not doing enough to protect the U.S. wages and prevent the exploitation of workers. What aspects of the H-2A program do you believe should be retained, if any, and which aspects should be removed?
I don't think I have enough time to talk about both of those in depth, but I would just say that H-2A workers need to be treated like any other worker. Coming into this country, have the same opportunities and the same rights and so forth. There definitely needs to be issue with wages, because they're trying to sustain not only themselves here when they're working in this country, but also take care of the families that they left behind in dealing with. So the economic issue is an important one. Obviously, housing is very critical. We don't want people, we all know what it used to be here in America in terms of where farm workers lived and so forth. And we don't want to relive that all over again. Transportation issues, once they're here, they don't have access to transportation. They're not coming with a vehicle. So they need to be able to have transportation to come and go from this country and taken care of in that particular way. In regards to, and then we have to deal with the recruitment issue. Lots of H-2A workers are recruited by agencies and programs that force them to pay a fee, a recruitment fee, that goes into the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So they come here feeling like they're in debt. They're fearful because of the fact that they can't do anything to create problems with that particular employer, that particular job, or supervisor, foreman, or whatever, because they'll lose that job. And then they can't deal with the paying back the debts and so forth. So, those are just some of the issues that concern us about the H-2A program.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. And quickly, Mr. Nassif, what do you think are the challenges right now, the challenges affecting the agricultural sector? Why are they different today than they were, say, back in 2006?
Well, they've been difficult for many years. I've been working on this issue for 18 years myself, and prior to that, I was an agricultural labor lawyer representing the employers, the farmers and ranchers in their negotiations. I had many of these negotiations with the United Farm Workers Union. So many of the problems are exactly the same. It's just that nobody's done anything about it for so long because it's always been such a political hot potato. When we look at the bare facts and we look at the economics, we look at the dramatic need for these workers and the value that they provide, because frankly, what would we be without those farm workers? We have to give consideration to how we treat them, and very true. Now, with H-2A workers, they come here with a non-immigrant intent. That's why they go into the H-2A program. If they had an immigrant intent, they probably would just cross the border or stay illegally and go to work for someone using a false document. So we don't see the need to change what we've got in H-2A, because when you do that, then you just risk more and more workers leaving all the time. We're already going to lose people if we have some sort of legal status for our existing workforce. Then if you now give the guest workers the same opportunity for that, then you give them an immigrant status, then you risk losing them along with everybody else, because, as everyone says, they're not going to stay in agriculture.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you, Madam.
And I would like to turn to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar, for her questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and many thanks to the panelists and witnesses here today. I'm so grateful for your wisdom and for your advocacy. Y yo también quiero decirles a todos ustedes, como les dijo el señor Correa, aquí están en su casa. Y es un honor estar con ustedes en esta lucha. Ms. Arteaga, and congratulations on your accomplishments. It's wonderful to know about them and hear about them. You did not get an opportunity to respond to a question, and the question came as a result of something that Mr. Brim mentioned, which was that it would be devastating to give visa holders legal status, essentially because once that legal status is attained, they then move away from working in the fields and get other jobs. I'm interested in your response.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. When I speak to farm workers, and they have 20 plus years of experience in this job, it is them. It's a part of them. Being a farm worker is them. My mother, I don't know what else she would be doing besides being a farm worker. My father, I don't know what else he would be doing besides being a dairy worker. That is who they are. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. And I'm going to ask the same question of Mr. Nassif and Mr. Rodriguez. And Mr. Nassif, in your testimony, you mentioned that the average age of farm workers is now over 40. What do you think the workforce will look like 10 years from now?
Well, I believe it's obviously going to be much reduced. You've got the fact that people in Mexico that have traditionally come over here to work in agriculture are doing so at a lesser rate. They're better educated. They have more opportunities in their home country. They're actually importing farm workers into Mexico. So our workforce is going to keep reducing and reducing. So what we've tried to do is two things. One, obviously try to get immigration reform to help resolve at least part of that problem. And the other is to try and create mechanized and innovative ways to reduce our reliance on manual labor, to make it easier to reduce our reliance on water and fertilizers. So we created a Center for Innovation and Technology in Salinas about 3 years ago, and we're looking for solutions to that. But it's an extremely expensive process. We've got some help in the Farm Bill. I think on the innovation front, it's just going to take a long time, and only the wealthiest of the farmers are going to be able to do it by themselves. And we want all farmers to participate, and we want farm workers to have some place to go, better jobs, more technological, less manual labor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rodriguez, same question for you. What do you think the workforce will look like 10 years from now?
You know, I think that one is that obviously they're going to continue to age. We don't have enough young workers coming into the workforce to do the necessary work, to have the skills and have the knowledge and so forth. And then we are going to become then reliant on other folks that are not necessarily born and raised here in the United States. So we already have an immigrant workforce, practically 99%, highly undocumented. And if we don't do something to change immigration reform, it's going to be even more undocumented. And there's going to be more fear and more problems attracting and keeping workers here in this country to be able to do the ag work.
And just to clarify, you believe that our workers have earned a path to citizenship, is that correct?
There's no doubt in our minds that workers come here, they work hard, they come here because they want to contribute, they want to provide for their families like anybody else does in this country, and they don't want to be wondering, the children don't want to be wondering if their parents are coming home at night, and vice versa, if they're, as parents, going to be coming home to their children.
I agree with you 100%. One last question, Mr. Rodriguez. In your testimony, you shared a bit about the collective agricultural worker experience of your members who are here today. How long have most non-U.S. farm workers been living and working in the United States?
Well, all these folks here have all been, I mean, I can talk about Rogelio Lona, who I've known now for the last 46 years. Rogelio, he's a mushroom worker, a year-round mushroom worker, and he works extremely hard. He works at a farm now where he makes over $40,000 a year and has medical benefits and so forth. There's no problem with him staying in ag. I mean, that's been his life, and he's worked there in that industry for the last 30-plus years with those kinds of benefits, and it kept him there as well as the workforce that he works with there at that particular company. And so I think that the more we can create those kind of situations for workers, the better it's going to be to not only attract workers, but to keep them there in the industry.
The gentlelady's time has expired. We have been called to vote, so I will not take my full 5 minutes for questions. I just have a short one. Mr. Rodriguez, there's been some discussion about pay. What does the average farm worker make per year, both undocumented, documented, and H-2A? Do you have those, an estimate of the salaries made?
You know, unfortunately, undocumented farm workers are making, wherever their particular state has as minimum wage, hopefully they're making at least that. And people get hourly rates and get piece rates and so forth. I think the average wage from what I've seen and heard in the statistics is around $20,000 a year.
So for a farm worker family would?
For a farm worker.
A farm
not even
worker.
for the family.
On the H-2A program, what are people earning a year?
That I don't know. I'm not sure.
We will try and, do you know that, Tom? What's the question? What is the average wage for an H-2A worker?
Well, the A, where the adverse effect wage rate is different
Right.
for every state.
Right.
For example, Arizona's $12, California's $13.92, Colorado's $13.13.
That's per hour.
New Mexico's 12 per hour,
Right,
yes.
right. So it's not a great, huge salary, although if you're from a very poor area, it looks good compared to what you might be earning
That's
in
if you're
some
working by
parts of
the
the
hour. If
country.
you're working on a piece rate,
Right.
it's much higher. Strawberries are
Right.
$20, $30.
Right. I'm going to stop now and say just this. This testimony has been very, very helpful to the subcommittee. Obviously, there are challenges that we face, but I think we all have the goal of making sure that the people who work in agriculture can do so legally, with dignity, and to be successful for them and their families and for the agricultural industry. And I have a sense of optimism that working together with the growers and the farmers and the farm workers, that we can come to agreement on what have previously been contentious issues, and that in that way, it will help us to, here in the Congress, who sometimes fight about immigration issues, to instead come together in a bipartisan way to come up with solutions that will work for our country and will make our constituents proud. So with that, thank you, Mr. Armstrong and all the members of the committee. This hearing is adjourned with gratitude to each of you as witnesses.